Hi. So welcome to the Sleep Mode broadcast from Somerset House. I'm Sarah Cook and I'm the curator of the Sleep Mode program, and it is based on a program that we started a year ago called 24/7. And I'm thrilled to have with us today some artists who are going to talk about their experience of working during lockdown. So we've got Garnet Hertz, who's joining us from Vancouver. He's a Canada Research Chair at Emily Carr. Of Michael Mandiberg, who's joined us from New York, an artist in the studio. You'll see that he's there painting some watercolors there on the screen. And Adi Wagnecht, who's joined us from Austria, and she'll be showing some of the work that she's been working on as well. So thank you all for coming. It's really a delight to have you here. I'm going to show a few images just to give a bit of background and context to the Sleep Mode program. And hopefully you were able to view the Sleep Mode program online from Somerset House. It's still there for you to see later. But as I said, the Sleep Mode project came about through curating 24/7, a wake-up call for a non-stop world, which took place at Somerset House last year. And this exhibition, of which these artists were all a part, really looked at the way in which we're producing and consuming at all hours of day and night, and the way in which capitalism has completely disrupted our sleep routines. And one of the inspirations for this show was the book 24/7 by Jonathan Crary. You can see my cat asleep on the book there in the armchair, as we'd all like to be. And I think that the experience under lockdown that we've had over the last few months has really pointed to the way in which our sleep and work patterns have changed as we're working from home or in different contexts than we would otherwise, as we're juggling homeschooling and childcare and work. So I'm here in Scotland in my new shed, which was built the minute lockdown happened so that I knew I could get out of the house and have a quiet place to teach and to study from. The 24/7 show included what we consider to be one of the first examples of the night shift, this painting of an Arkwright cotton mill at night by Joseph Wright of Derby, where you can see the moon in the sky, but you can see this factory that's illuminated by electric light. And I think we often consider that our sleep patterns have changed as a result of new technologies, when in fact electric light is as much to blame as any digital technology we have now. And the place of our work has changed. Sometimes we work very collectively together, as people do in factories, but increasingly we work alone at home. And this has changed a lot too now. Some of the other artists who are in the Sleep Mode program, whose works you can see on Somerset House's website, include Nastya Sadaronko and her piece 6 Months Without. She spent 6 months at Somerset House offline, not using the internet at all, and writing letters by hand to people. And she reads some of those letters in her documentary, which you can see on the Somerset House website. And Nastya's work really features that feeling of disconnect and reconnect, and that slowing down in a different pace of work that you get if you're not consuming content via the screen at all hours. Garnet is going to talk maybe a little bit about his work, Phone Safe, which was featured in the exhibition, that idea of really unlocking yourself from your device by locking your device away. Michael Mandiberg is going to talk about their work, Quantified Self-Portrait, where they recorded their life for a year in terms of screenshots and the kind of technologies of surveillance and work that feature in that. Douglas Copeland has written a number of slogans for the 21st century, which you have seen online, which really are the kind of mantra for our 24/7 life. And you'll see that we've used Doug's slogans. He's been writing many, many more since lockdown that really reflect the way in which being isolated is maybe changing our brain. Adi's here, and she'll talk a little bit about her work and her beauty tutorial information security videos, and those were a feature of the show. Alan Warburton's going to be joining us virtually through a small video that he made about his new work, Country Diary, which premiered on Somerset House's website on Tuesday. And that's new work that Alan's made during lockdown, so I'd encourage you to watch that as well. And in the broadcast that went out on Friday night, that's online for you to see, Labs showed their Gospel According to Yawn, which was a photo booth that we had set up in the exhibition that allowed you to capture photos of yourself yawning, because we understood that yawning is contagious, and that by making it contagious, we might encourage one another to actually switch off and sleep. This is really key to this idea that 24/7 life is a life of constant consumerism, and that it's really only sleep is one of the few places that hasn't been commodified and turned into capital, and dreaming is the last kind of remaining almost private space. And so the idea of sleep mode, a world where you're never fully on or off, we could really challenge actually by logging off. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and welcome you again with the artists who are here. And I can see that perhaps what we should do, as Garnet is getting ready in Vancouver so early in the morning, if Michael's available to talk first, then maybe we'll go to Michael, and Michael can tell us a little bit about what they're up to, as you can see on screen there, painting away. And it's really nice to have you here. So welcome, Michael. Over to you. 1 minute while we plug things in and reconnect.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. That's perfect.
Hi. So give me 1 second, because I was hoping to have a little bit more done on this. So I'm going to show you one that's done. Give me 1 second.
That's terrific. Thank you very much. If you saw the broadcast, you will have seen many of the paintings that Michael's been up to lately, and you'll have a chance to go and have a look at those later as well. The setup, what we've asked the artists today to do is to show us a little bit of where they're working now and how they're working. So,
you still want me on?
Yes, please.
Great. So just imagine that this were actually the call, someone's background from the call that we were on. This was a call that I was on for my union at the College of Staten Island, where I teach at CUNY at the City University of New York, because everything's gone to shit because of COVID. And they want to basically cut the budget by about 15%. So this was somebody's background. It was actually someone who is the social media manager. And I've been on all these calls like this call, which this one's kind of a fun one. But there's been lots of really dreadful ones, like meetings with faculty members, and pleasurable ones like teaching. And I've taken them all from basically here, this room that I'm in. So this is, this is out the window. And it's, this is the spare bedroom that we have. And I'm really fortunate that we were able to have this, the spare bedroom was available. We often have roommates in here. So in here, I've been having these calls. And I kind of lose myself. I kind of go out of body as I'm on them, being present and not present at the same time. And I've been making this other project, which is why the video setup is like it is. This is a portrait of someone who worked with me, one of my students, in 2006. I've been painting portraits of everyone who's worked in my studio, and as a way of recognizing their labor. So labor and sort of presence and being on is something that has been present in my work for a very long time. And this is sort of an attempt to sort of culminate in consciousness about the labor. So this was part of initially I started working with people largely for pedagogical purposes. This is one of my former students, Dan Colonna, who was a group that came and worked with me in my studio, largely so they could have, portfolio materials so they could go get jobs. I teach design and digital media. It's sized based off of the number of hours that each subject worked for me. And you can see in here, if you get up really close, you can see there's like this digital kind of underpainting on there. And it's important that it sort of was like the hand and the code, which is sort of present in all my work. So I've been making these paintings. So I've been thinking about painting. I haven't painted for 20 years since I was an undergraduate student. So I just started making paintings like this initially starting with smaller ones and then going to these sort of larger sizes that are the backgrounds, as if people had left, as if they left and sort of left their body like I was leaving my body in these meetings. And I was thinking this morning in preparation for this call, I was wondering whether I was doing double time work or whether I was transcending work. Like, I don't know whether I'm like multitasking or whether I'm able to like go elsewhere and not be doing anything at all in some sense. So that's a question that I have as of this morning. So for context, let me share my screen. Second. So this is what, this is what my schedule looked like. I'm sure many people's schedule looked like this around the same time with all of these like meetings. Like these were meetings with my students. This is the class I was teaching. This was a public event that obviously didn't happen. This is my therapist. This is, you know, working with an assistant. This is like an attempt to be social. This is the residency that I was supposed to start in March, but I'm obviously not there in the World Trade Center in New York. So this is the context in which I was sort of constantly on the computer, like most people or many people of a certain kind of class and labor force, right? People who are doing knowledge work. What I was working on otherwise was these paint portraits, these portraits, which all went up on there. I was recording all my painting sessions, and those all show up here on this project on the Whitney, where you can see all of my all the time that I'm doing hour by hour making these paintings. These paintings, which themselves are sort of marked by the time in which the people contributed their work. It's all forms of measurement in some sense. And I want to contextualize this by sort of flipping back to a project I did 20 years ago called Shop Mandiberg, which was an e-commerce site on which I marketed and sold all my possessions. DHTML, for those of you that don't remember, DHTML. So I had all my clothes, my underwear sold really well. I had coats, lots of t-shirts, shirts. I had my letters and journals. I had, sorry, I'm moving the Zoom interface here. I had a lot of miscellaneous writing supplies, etc. What's I think relevant here is like, this comes out of, the impetus to make this comes out of a lot of sort of like post-fluxist feminist performance art, durational performance art. People like Miralee Latterman-Michaelis or Tei-Ching Hsieh and Lina Montano, who were turning, in a sense, life into art. And I was trying to reflect on the way in which life had become commodified, and as well simultaneously as in some senses art being like, at that moment in particular around 2001, being like properly and fully commodified through the process of really, you know, a lot of that was locked into place by the 90s with, you know, the YBA and the rise of the art fair. But I think what's relevant here is also this little project I made alongside it called Michael Mandiberg Freelance Conceptual Artist, where I was selling all of my time. So it was for $20 an hour, which was at that moment a very high price to be paid just to walk, for example, but a pretty good price for programming. So somewhere in the middle. And I have just, who you are, what your email is, when you want me to start, and a whole lot of adverbs. From this, you sort of see a bunch of things which come into sort of the work that I've been making more recently, which I'm going to jump to one project in particular. So I'm going to show you. Let's try to see if the video will play. So this is. I'll let this play. We'll see. Someone can give me a thumbs up if it's playing on their screens. Good. So in 2006, I tracked all of my time using quantified self tools. For those who are not familiar, quantified self is a technological, philosophical, ideological belief / movement that believes that one can know oneself through one's data. There's a whole lot of things I did, one of which was to build this tool that allowed me to take screenshots and photographs off my webcam every 15 minutes. That is a tool that's used to monitor freelance labor. In fact, one of the programmers that I worked with for a long time was helping me with some aspects of some of these projects around this time. Themselves had to turn down a job because they required them to install this software. Here's just some stills. On the right-hand side is qualitative data from my journaling. I cut my hair at the very start and let it grow throughout the piece as a way of marking time. And also of marking citation to Teaching Say's time clock performance, where he punched a time clock every hour on the hour for a year. And I guess part of what I'm reflecting on, if we were looking at, Sarah showed the painting of the factory at night. I'm in some ways reflecting on the way in which we measure and mark time have changed to the point where we are always marking time. This thing will tell me on its own, it tells me how many hours I was on the screen, or the average amount of time. That was one of the things I tracked that has gone from being something that was like a weird add-on that I was able to add on, find some, a program that did, to becoming part of the main operating system. So, this is sort of marking some of that transition. So
that's perfect.
With that, I'm gonna go back to painting.
That's a perfect segue to think about how we track our time and how our understanding of time has totally changed when we're working in such different conditions. So thank you so much for showing us all that work. And it's so nice to be reminded of those earlier web art projects of yours, which are so important to that early history of net art. So I'm going to ask if we can now totally swap time zones and go back in time, 4 hours from New York to Vancouver. Is that right? 5 hours? Where Garnet is up and
yes.
breakfast.
Yes.
And hello, yes. Garnet, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to just screen share here and talk about some of my work. Let's go here. Okay, can you see that? Oops. sorry. Okay, can you see that? Hello?
No, I can't see it yet.
Okay. I'm not sure what's up with my my slides, but I'll just go to my website. So in terms of, can you
You need to start your screen.
okay, sorry.
I don't know if Michael's painting your background, but it looks pretty good.
Okay. Can you see that?
Yes, that works.
Okay.
That. Perfect.
Sorry about that. Okay. So my work, I'm in Vancouver. As Sarah mentioned, I'm at Emily Carr University, and I work there as a professor in design. And I have this, a lot of my work kind of orients around loving and hating technology. And I started working about 5 years ago with different devices to kind of isolate you from technology or from each other or your spouse in bed. I'd sketched out a few different devices to kind of be a hood for you to wear in bed so that you could use your phone while your spouse was sleeping. And this kind of evolved into thinking about making a device to take away phones. I'd started with a rough kind of prototype like this, and the idea was that people would put their phones inside of a box that would kind of limit it and take it away from you. And the idea is that people would surrender their phones kind of almost as a game or kind of like a social experiment. And what I did is I actually built this, I started out with this prototype, which was a pretty rough kind of prototype, and built this, which was in the exhibition at Somerset House by the front desk. So anyways, the way that this thing works is that you insert your phone, it gets dropped down inside, and then you add time to it through a button, and you can only add time, you can't subtract it. And then you have to kind of sit there and wait as the thing counts down. And what you end up, and people can also add their phones after the after one is in there. And so what you end up having is a bunch of basically bored people sitting around looking at this thing and kind of playing a game with surrendering their phones over a period of time. So it's really kind of operates like a kiosk that that kind of takes away your phone. There are other projects that kind of relate to this. There's a project by Ishak Bertrand that I worked on as well called Slow Game. And this is involved with a game that you can only really use it once per day. So the idea here is that there's a game platform that you can only make one move every day. And so that it works super, super, super slow. So I was involved in taking this and making it into a more kind of distributed platform. And a game platform that you can play once a day. And the idea here is that we wanted to really kind of slow down the idea of computing into something that is really kind of slow. As well, I've made other projects like this is a hammer to smash your phone. It's actually adapted seatbelt cutter and window smasher, which is actually a common American freebie item. So the idea here is that this is a phone hammer that smashes your phone and cuts your cable. And as well, I've been working on recent work with Google Home devices. The idea here is that is to make a device or make a computing system that intentionally kind of prompts and talks to a group of Google Home devices, and that it continues to kind of pepper the array of smart speakers with different things. Initially, when I started this project, I had thought, well, this could be used to call the Department of Homeland Security, for example. You could put in kind of controversial search terms into the Google devices. And the idea here is that this would highlight the link between the US government and companies like Google, Facebook, and so forth. And so the idea here was to think about how to hack technology and to hack Google with kind of a low-tech kind of methodology. And so I started taking apart TVs and VCRs, and took kind of the most controversial search terms on Google that would make that are rumored to have the CIA or Department of Homeland Security watch you and monitor you, and then fed these into this array. And I've only done one exhibition with this work, and this is currently in progress. But the first actually the second installation that I did, the first in a gallery, just had this device. Let's see if this video plays. So the way that this works is that this computing system, which runs on an Arduino and a custom voice synthesis circuit, talks and puts those terms into this Google Home array, and then this searches the internet, and it creates a Google profile that actually follows on all of these Google Home devices. It actually creates a Google profile that you can monitor and see what's going on, and see it kind of reverse engineer how Google is constructing your identity through these Google devices. And that's it. That's it for my talk.
Thanks, Garnet. I mean, I think this is something else we're probably going to touch on a little bit later as we come to the conversation, but the fact that in this condition of working from home, we are more aware of all of these devices and how we connect to the internet, and how they're creating profiles of us all, and how those profiles are changing. I mean, there was a statistic recently about in Britain, people are online 25% more than they were before, like just massive increase in terms of the number of hours people are online. And I think, our awareness of our relationship to our technologies is really important. So things like your phone hammer, actually, I think people maybe want it even more now than they did before, or maybe want it less. I think it's really a good question.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to.
I mean, I definitely need the phone hammer.
And hopefully we'll talk about your studio behind you too in a little bit, but just as time is pressing on, as it always does, we're going to turn to Addie and hear a little bit about what Addie's been working on. Well, I can see Michael's painting is coming along very well there. So Addie, you're up, and would love welcome and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Okay, so I'm going to try to do the screen share and see how this goes. So I wanted to, I guess, focus a little bit more on my collaborative work and work with groups that I've been affiliating myself with for the last almost 10 years now. I wanted to start speaking about first Deep Lab. If you're not familiar, Deep Lab is a group of researchers, hackers, artists. We have a literal rock star singer in the group, sociologists and academics who are interested in peer-to-peer technologies, surveillance, autonomy, anonymity, and creative applications with atypical uses. We were first formed out of Carnegie Mellon University through a Warhol Foundation grant, which was graciously given to us by Golan Levin, who is the director at the Studio for Creative Inquiry there. Deep Lab has gone through a lot of iterations, basically in the last 8 years. When we originally came together, it was primarily researchers and artists working specifically within the US. We had a few international arrivals, but for the most part, it was very domestic centric. With our second iteration, we did this in New York City at New Museum. At New Museum, we were bringing in more people from kind of the outer boroughs and places that weren't necessarily New York City centric. We were really interested in sort of how we could bring people into the museum in the space that wouldn't necessarily otherwise visit. We did things like workshops and hack shops. So we would teach people how to use Tor, which is a way to kind of encrypt your browser information, or PGP, which encrypts your data, and sort of trying to teach people who weren't necessarily quote unquote technologists, technological tools that they could use to their advantage, especially in kind of underprivileged communities. From there, we've started doing more things outside of the US with the current administration. There's a lot of current members who are very active who, because of their national passports, are not easily allowed to be in the US. So we've been doing things in the UK and a lot in Germany, and kind of focusing specifically on things that are going on in the Middle East, because we have quite a few active members from Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and so on and so forth, who are doing a lot of work around creating channels for LGBTQ members of the community who want to speak and communicate with each other without fear of prosecution. So from Deep Lab, I started working with another group, or rather forming another group. In 2016, my friend Heather Dewey-Hadborg was given a, how do you say, like a honorable mention at something called Ars Electronica Festival, which is a festival that has been held in Austria in Europe for about 40 years now. But we found, interestingly enough, we started looking at the data and found that there was a huge kind of bias in terms of who was getting the awards, and that there was over, out of all the Golden Nikas, which is the award-winning statue, the majority of those went to men, specifically white men within the field. And there were many, if not the majority, if not entirely, I could argue, women and non-minority people who had been completely overlooked. So we wrote this article in The Guardian right before Trump was elected. And then we realized that kind of having this hashtag activism, so we had hashtag #KissMyArts, that went completely viral on Twitter, but we realized that we wanted to do something more than just have this kind of hashtag discussion. Heather and I, and at the time, Lynn Hirschman was very active as well. We wanted to kind of use our privilege as artists within the art world, and being somewhat mid-career to Lynn, who's very established, use kind of our privileges and our face to give and find access for a group of artists who we felt were very strong in terms of their work and what they were doing, but not necessarily always given the platform. So then in 2016, towards the end of the year, we decided to start raising money and funds that we could basically bring in a large number of artists who are doing interesting work, give them a good artist fee. In some case, we commissioned some artists. We also did a symposium, but we wanted to bring them into the center of New York City, and kind of, as one of the artists called Refiguring the Future was one of her own works, and sort of how do you decolonize and bring in a larger discussion to what we felt was a very white-centric space, and unfortunately still is. So this was I guess the images from the show in New York. And since then, we've been looking at ways to expand this and support artists. So right now we're working on creating a fund for artists to get funding for their work, as well as kind of deal with the relief aspects of what's going on for many artists, ourselves included, in the current kind of lockdown COVID era that we're in. And then Sarah wanted me to talk a little bit about some of the work I have in the show right now. So I'm going to show a really quick video or excerpt of it.
Depression Bond status update, quarantine day number 3,625 billion infinity. Today I'm going to show you guys how to do the perfect cat eye using tape. I saw this on YouTube, so you know it's going to work. And if it doesn't, that doesn't matter because I haven't left the house in at least 35 days. I'm going to also use this eyeliner. It's called Thin Essence Eyeliner Pen. There is social distancing is not an option when you're incarcerated. So people have been sending me a lot of DMs lately about what Zoom is using. It's not encrypted, and what does that even mean? Basically, Zoom is using something called TLS, which is transport encryption. Put this in basic pitch terms. Don't use Zoom to send dick pics. I repeat, no dicks on Zoom. When we talk about end-to-end encryption, aka when a thirst trap is sent to you, it means nobody in the middle can unscramble this. This is basically what we always want to look for. If you send this thirst trap or dick pic via Facebook or something like Zoom, it basically means that it's end-to-end encrypted. Store those messages in plain text, aka they can read them. This also means that anyone who gets into your account, crazy exes, will be able to access this information. It's a little bit janky because I never wear eyeliner or I just drink 26 cups of coffee. Either could be true.
So I won't play the whole video because I have a short period to present all this, but these were commissioned by the Mozilla Foundation. I presented the idea of creating a sort of unique perspective on information security, operation security, cryptographic sort of information to a user group, which I felt was underrepresented within that conversation. So I presented the idea of doing these videos basically using beauty tutorials. The interesting thing about the videos and kind of an unintended consequence was I ended up sort of hacking the YouTube algorithm. So if you look on the side, you see that there's legitimate, well, not these because I watch dog and animal videos, but for the other ones, you can see that there's like legitimate beauty tutorials that they kind of embed themselves into. So there's a huge amount of people that find these videos because they're looking for how to make a cat eye, and then they kind of end up learning about end-to-end encryption in the end. But I wanted to make as many videos as I can that would be accessible, easy to understand, and in under 5 minutes you could understand, you know, ironically we're on Zoom right now, but why not to use Zoom, and what your alternatives are, or how to use end-to-end encryption, burner phones, that sort of stuff. So I guess the last thing I can talk about, because I have a minute, is sort of where things are right now. So I've been thinking a lot about sort of what protest looks like when you can't go out on the streets, be it because of a pre-existing condition or because you have people that are dependent upon you and you can't risk, you know, having some sort of jail sentence or something thrown in where you would no longer have the ability to support those people that are needing you to take care of them. And this is kind of the solution I came up with about a week after George Floyd was murdered. I was pretty horribly unemployed, pretty short on money, and I wanted to find a way to raise funds, raise awareness, and I had very little means to do it. So I actually ended up turning to watercolor and arts, and I started looking at, you know, images that people were sharing online, sharing on Twitter, sharing on Instagram, and painting those, and then asking people to send me the receipts in exchange for a print or a work of art. So I ended up raising about $20,000 with the first iteration, and then $10,000 with the next, as a way to kind of reflect on what was going on and how I could contribute in a way that I wouldn't otherwise be possible. So that's it. My time's up.
That's brilliant, Addie. You should say that you asked people to send you photographs of receipts where they'd made donations to particular charities and groups. And
Yeah, sorry, I did forget to say that.
Yeah, yeah.
So
no,
yeah, I asked them to send receipts to Black Lives Matter organizations, trans organizations or trans advocacy groups, voting groups, bail funds, so on and so forth.
Yeah, terrific. Thanks very much for sharing that work with us. It's really important to see and to see those connections, as you say, to other groups and the way in which your work has tried to foster community, which is something that's been pretty tricky during lockdown and yet more necessary than ever.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really curious also, watercolor painting. There's some happening on screen right now in Michael's studio, and something in the background as well. And so I know we definitely want to have time to have a chat with each other, but I'd also love to show you this short video that Alan Warburton made as part of the Sleep Mode program for the New Work Country Diary that Alan made, that's available to see on Somerset House's website, just because it's really lovely. So we're going to play that now, and then that gives everyone watching a chance to get their questions together as well for our artists, and then we'll have a discussion after that. So over to Alan. We haven't got volume, I don't think, on that video. I don't have it at this end. Let's just make sure we've got the right volume going there. And try that again.
So in March, at the beginning of lockdown, I moved my desk from my studio to my tiny home, and after a few difficult weeks mourning the loss of like a pre-COVID schedule, I decided to make a film. And at first this was just to take my mind off things, but I got kind of sucked into the production, and it actually really helped me focus while the world was going crazy. And this film was set in a TV studio. I got totally immersed in making it, but then after about 6 or 8 weeks of modelling and lighting this virtual space, I was getting pretty itchy to escape. I really wanted to get out of the computer, out of the flat and out of the country. So this is why I've made Country Diary. So this is a film about nature made using a computer, because it's still hard getting out of London without a car. And this is also a project that kind of helped me crystallise some of the thoughts that I've been having about virtual spaces and how we use them as escapes, especially in times like these. So my main thought is it's really about how absurd it is to create replicas of natural spaces. And that's something that's been popping up a lot in the art world at the moment, especially in AR and VR. And it's often framed as somehow being about like drawing attention to the politics of climate change by presenting a virtual reality version of a natural habitat. And this is like an appealing artistic strategy for the times we're in, because it kills 2 birds with 1 stone. We get to talk about climate change while also feeding the appetite for content on screens and exciting new technology. But it's obviously not hard to see that there's some inherent contradictions in this strategy. And the most obvious kind of ethical problem is that computation has a carbon footprint, and it's got a huge one too. So there's this hypocrisy in using tech to construct virtual worlds full of lush nature. That said, as we've seen through lockdown, the air cleared in our cities, and yet a global standstill still didn't put a dent in emissions, so it's probably not the fault of a few hundred artists working with VR. The real absurdity is obviously deeper. It's a more structural problem endemic to modern technology. And modern technology is always sold to us with this familiar language of tech utopianism. So for example, some new device or game or immersive VR experience is supposed to allow you to get closer to something. You feel more of something, it's convenient, you can immerse yourself, you don't need to travel, you can stay in the comfort of your own home and go anywhere. So in enforced lockdown, we should all have been jumping into VR worlds, right? But did we? What I personally wanted was the opposite, especially after making my TV studio film. I wanted to be immersed in real nature, and like a lot of people in cities without a garden, I had a real hunger to be out. So the thoughts that I was having really made me see how weird it was to build virtual worlds at the expense of real experience. And it's kind of obvious that at the moment we need to be preserving the natural habitats we have, planting new ones, and not mining the environment for the minerals needed to speed up all of our digital devices and flesh out our virtual worlds. So the contradictions run deep between environmentalism and virtual world building. So that sort of brings me back to the project that I've made for Somerset House's Sleep Mode exhibition. And I wanted to explore and highlight the contradictions and absurdities that I've just been talking about by really exposing the mechanics of visually building this kind of virtual nature. Because it's not a one-click thing. The computational effort is quite significant, especially if your computer is a few years old like mine. So Country Diary shows the chugging, pixelated realization of this simulated world that's really heavy with polygons. And getting hold of 3D models to populate a scene like this is increasingly easy. One of the most interesting trends, especially in games, has been the use of scans of real-life natural specimens. Often these are provided by a company called Quixel, who now have their library of natural objects embedded in the Unreal Games engine. So computers can now sort of heave this data. It's been optimized. Tricks are available to load very detailed models into a scene without crashing the computer. And because of this, we get images and aesthetics that take advantage of that. So there's a lot of games that are set in overgrown post-human landscapes full of ruins and creeping vines and wildness. And even within that, there's a certain sort of taxonomy of nature that's more prevalent. So, for example, it's easier to 3D scan a tree stump and import it into a game, or to scan a rock, than it is to scan leaves. So the former ends up looking more real than the latter. The vegetation looks real, but the water less so, and that's because you can't scan water. So I think what I'm getting at here is that form and aesthetics in virtual worlds are always led by industry, by hardware, and that aesthetics is this kind of second order thing. And there's another program that I've been using called Substance Designer, which is a program that lets users design sort of intelligent textures that can randomly populate photorealistic surfaces. And I've heard anecdotally from friends who teach computer graphics that, and also people who use it in industry, that there's been this kind of weird upsurge in students and artists paying a lot of attention to nature. So they're like this army of 19th century naturalists like John Ruskin or Henry David Thoreau. They perform this close observation of nature. But the funny thing is that the value of it is it's not for the spirit or the soul or for scientific inquiry or like humanity. It's for entertainment. It's for games and films that can be populated with more immersive content. So it's sort of in the services of photorealism and the construction of another world, a kind of proxy world that runs parallel to our own and that's created for entertainment and bound on every side by order and optimization and commercial hardware and software. Maybe this army of naturalists are actually more like the colonial collectors of the 1800s, capturing and imprisoning samples forever, like Pokemon meets startup culture meets Victorian specimen hunters. Or maybe they're like old-fashioned landscape designers. Maybe this new digital nature is like an equivalent to someone like Capability Brown imposing this cinematic aesthetic onto nature where every view is overwrought with design. Or maybe it's a kind of digital Darwinism where gradually through digitization a new taxonomy of natural resources is being created. Ironically, burning natural resources ever more intensely the closer we get to full 360-degree photorealism. Anyway, all that is why it's strange to be here at home at midsummer in 2020, simulating a summer's day in software that'll stream to your devices wirelessly for entertainment. So this is my country diary.
So you can go to Somerset House's website and watch the Country Diary in full. It's really, really delightful. So I think it's time for us to have a good chat. Actually, there's been so many ideas that have come up through here. And I suppose that, the first question, and one of the things that we put Sleep Mode together for, originally this was going to be a physical show at Glasgow International, supported by the University of Glasgow, where I'm a professor. And of course we weren't able to do that because Glasgow International was cancelled, or postponed at least. And so we're doing this virtually here. And I know that, of course, many of you would have had lots and lots of other things cancelled. But what's been one of the kind of upsides of that in terms of, I don't know, sleep patterns, work patterns, new places to work, new things that you've got up to? Does anyone want to chip in or have any comments about that in terms of time zones and working patterns? Or maybe Garnet, you're up early.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I haven't been really doing much of anything. I mean, or at least I mean, it's been completely strange. And I think that for me, at least, childcare has been something that I had really kind of taken for granted in the past, that is really kind of impacted my work schedule and life. That I mean, I have 4 kids, and so I'm well accustomed to children in general, but for me, childcare was pretty massive and massively kind of changed everything that I'm doing, and also, like, my studio, I'm sort of like plunked down in my garage in amongst the the beer cooler and the snowboards and everything that are right behind me. So yeah, I mean, it's been very surreal, to say the least.
And Adi, how have you found also making work in amongst a different schedule? I think you've had a slightly different work schedule since lockdown. Don't know if your sleep schedule's changed too.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I spent, I don't know, I was trying to think the last time I've been this long in one location. My schedule's been crazy. Like, I'm used to traveling every month or 2 months, and now suddenly I'm in the same space for the last 4 or 5 months, and this has been crazy. But also realizing, like, how unnecessary, how much of that travel actually has been is quite interesting, and sort of trying to figure out and delineate what actually is necessary to be in or go to, and what can be done online, and what actually needs to be done in person, and what does it mean to not be in person, and sort of all these questions, and looking at Zoom more than I probably ever would like to admit that I've been in front of a computer. But in that regard, it's been sort of a privilege to be able to be in one place for a while and not just constantly on planes. But it's also been a little bit paralyzing, because it was like 16 months of exhibitions and artist talks and residencies just completely wiped in 2 or 3 days. So that was quite a shock to my system.
Michael, you showed us your calendar right at the beginning, and I know I was thinking about the tension you've been feeling, of course, being in New York and helicopters overhead, and time to be out on the street and time to be in the studio, and continue to be productive and make work when the world is, pretty changing quite dramatically outside the window. I don't know if there's any thoughts you had about that way in which your work and schedule has changed.
Well, I think that there's a lot of things there. I think the inverse of what Addie was saying, which is the like being able to travel, is I'm not really able to travel very much because of a disability. So for me, it's somehow like, actually I have access to, it's a strange inverse where, like, now everything's on Zoom. I'm actually able to go and have, like, I would not have, it's hard for me to, I wouldn't have come to the opening of the show, even if I were invited and had a plane ticket for me, for example. So there's a strange thing there. The flip of that, though, is that I can't go outside for the protests. I live at Grand Army Plaza, which is one of the key sites where the protests have been happening in Brooklyn. So we've had a helicopter above our house. I mean, they've gone now after it's been about 10 days since they were actively flying, but for 3 weeks, we had helicopters literally directly above our house, maybe 200 feet up, 300 feet up, for 3 to 5 hours a day. But I really wasn't able to. So it's a very strange dissociative kind of feeling of being able to go elsewhere, but not really able to go outside of one's house. And so this has been my reaction.
Yeah, I was intrigued when you said at the beginning about you're not sure whether you're multitasking or tuning out. And I think this is the key condition of living in sleep mode, isn't it? It's like you're kind of always alert. There's always something that you're like listening out to or staying awake for or waiting for a notification about. And I'm curious as to how we change that relationship we have to our devices, to our technologies, and kind of actually learn to log out properly or use them differently.
But I think part of what, just to jump in and just to respond to that, part of what I meant when I was talking about that is both about being multitasking and versus like checking out, but also about being able to go into, flow state, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's kind of idea of like deep concentration and the pleasure of losing oneself as a way of checking out. Like, is that productive, or is it a dissociative thing? Go, Addie.
I was gonna say I've had a completely different experience, which is so interesting because, we've been friends for so long, and I feel that for me, I've had the completely opposite. Like, it's been impossible for me to zone out in the sense of like, I can't just work on my work, but there's 60,000 other things I'm having to do instead. And I found it really hard to, I'm actually really inspired that you found a way to channel this into making work, because for me, it's been almost impossible for me to think about making work or know how to concentrate on making work.
Don't get me wrong. It's like, this is the 1 hour of the day when I actually can lose myself. The rest of the time I've either been crying or aimless, or worried about how I'm going to get food, or freaked out by the sound of the sirens around us constantly. Because it went from being ambulance sirens to street racers, people drag racing, to the sirens of the cops and the helicopters. So it's been periods of like complete and total silence in between them, like really eerie, creepy silence.
Yeah. I'm curious to know, actually, from all of you, kind of what, for me, I found that I've completely logged off in a way. Like, I check my email in the morning, maybe once, if that, and there are days where I just, like, I don't go on any social media. I don't go where I was historically, I've been very active all the time. And since kind of end of March, I've really I found it almost to be emotional labor, and I'm exhausted, and I don't want to be online. I don't want to respond to DMs. I've been very withdrawn from my social media, and I'm even like checking text messages. So I'm curious if that's the case for all of you as well, or if it's been like a completely different experience.
I think one of the things that Douglas Copeland's slogan has been so good at kind of reminding us is that we lose track of what day it is. And so unless there's a routine. So routine.
Yeah. I mean, for me, sorry, I'm lagging here.
Keep going.
Yeah, we can hear you.
For me, it's been, for me, it's been, I think I'm kind of like dropping out here, but for me, it's been completely surreal. And in a lot of ways, it's been, I've been totally reevaluating like what I'm doing with my life in general, and all at the same time, extensively doing a lot of reading and learning about pandemics, epidemiology, racism, the history of monuments. I think a lot of us have just been going to school in a lot of ways and learning, just kind of overburdened and are kind of, doing a crash course in a lot of ways about especially race and history, and also infectious diseases. I mean, we're all kind of put through this crash course every single day about this stuff, and I mean, it's all of this stuff is super important, and way I mean, it's important stuff to do, but at the same time, a lot of us are doing a lot of learning right now as well.
So one of the things some of us have been learning, and this is a question that's come in from Joe on YouTube, saying that two of the artists here have embraced the analog with painting. Is this akin to the trend of baking bread during lockdown? Or is it actually something a lot deeper? I mean, is there a question here about how we have immersed ourselves in the digital and the way in which we're finding ways to unlock from the digital? So like, I mean, I've had this funny thing where I've been buying magazines and newspapers since lockdown, and I've refused to recycle them because I just want to see how big the pile gets on the living room floor. So that's my analog version. But do you think there is this question here about moving away from the digital, or somehow giving ourselves permission to, I think is what it is.
Which Joe was that? Was that a specific Joe?
I think we can get another Joe we know who's been doing watercolor paintings of people in VR. That would be Joseph Delap, perhaps, but I'm not sure. But yeah.
Well,
yeah, I mean, go ahead, Michael.
I was going to say, I've been buying books. I have like a book pile. So it's funny, Sarah, you have magazines, because I went from going to reading everything on my Kindle to like, I have my analog book pile and I'm reading books. And as I read them, they're piling. Similar metric. Go ahead, sorry.
Michael, were you going to say about painting? Is this akin to baking?
Well, I was going to say, I made the shift before that in some sense. But these are like proper paintings, right? These are like, there's no digital element in them. I'm just trying to reflect the digital world in them in some sense. So I guess in that sense, there is still a shift. For me, it's a way of, I mean, I think it's a way of, like there's some psychology to it I think of like putting a distance between, like I'm literally looking right now at, let me see if I can do this.
You're looking at Addie's background.
I gotta turn my, okay, so I'm looking at this, I have it on my phone so that I can see it while I'm watching everything else. And then I'm also seeing Addie with it in the background. So it's like this weird way of negotiating this space that I don't want to be in.
I think our recognition of the time that we're spending on screen is really changing. And this was something I felt we'd begun to understand a little bit when we were working on the 24/7 show, and we were kind of cracking jokes about, oh yeah, blue screen's keeping us up at night. But now I think there's a very different sense of that staying up at night on screen that's changed a lot. One of the other questions we've had, and I don't know, Garnet, whether this is of interest to you, the question is from Patrick: how do we reconcile ourselves with infrastructural problems of networked society, given this massive carbon footprint, which is something that Alan also mentioned in his video. But do we feel that tension of like the time being online or the time engaging in the network with the not engaging in the network?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of what I've experienced, I mean, it's been, I mean, or at least I built that phone safe really as almost like a self-portrait, like as if I really need it. And I totally need it now more than ever, because I just, I log into my phone on CNN.com or whatever. And it's like, the day is like, it feels like the day is done, Like it feels like the day just kind of the digital kind of everything just really absorbs a lot of my energy in really kind of like a negative kind of way. And in it, and but I at this point now I feel you know, kind of thrown onto my back a bit and kind of a little bit helpless in terms of being able to kind of resist it. And it's kind of like a constant, it's kind of a constant thing that I'm constantly kind of working against. And yeah, I mean, I don't know really what to say about it other than that.
I think we're all finding new tricks and new ways of measuring our time. As I said, like routine seems quite important. And one of the things I wrote about in the essay that went with sleep mode is about the kind of habits that artists have and whether creative people do have different sorts of daily routines and whether those routines actually matter more because of either the precarity of their working lives. So the difference is when you're saying, you know, giving a lecture here or running a workshop there or doing a show here, and that lockdowns really exposed that precarity in artists' lives, I think. Is there anything about your daily routines and how that interfaces with like the new world we want to try and create, if this really is a capitalist slowdown, if this really does change the way in which our time is valued?
I mean, I think it's completely radically shifted people's sense of time. More, I mean, like it really has. The pandemic has really very significantly just kind of pulled the plug on a lot of people's sense of time. And I don't think that there's any way to measure how it's going to impact in the future. I really, I mean, it's really uncertain, I think, how it's going to impact everything, because in terms of where I live, like Vancouver, you know, restaurants are open. We've had, you know, under a dozen COVID cases in the province over the past week or so. So it's, you know, fairly subdued, but restaurants are open and they're virtually empty because people aren't really ready to go back and don't want to. And I think that really applies to the economy and a lot of other things as well. People are very absorbed in thought and with a lot of things and don't necessarily really want to start back.
Michael, do you have any thoughts about like what's the new routines you'd like to create, or if you're happy this might be a whole new capitalist world in a different with a different
I mean, I think the hardest thing for me is like not being able to leave the house. When I was I run a program called the New York Arts Practicum. It's a summer program for young artists that come to New York and apprentice with mentor artists. And one of the things that they learn in the process, because they don't have access to a studio, that's part of the pedagogy, is that they learn whether they're the kind of person who needs a separate space to go to work, or whether they're the kind of person who needs to create a world around them in the space in which they live to work. Because they'll, you know, we end up meeting with people who are like very distinctly like one artist, you know, collaborative that you all probably know, that we go and meet with, who says basically they got a studio, they got assistants, they started doing big production work, and they decided that they did not like it at all and they weren't making the kind of work they wanted to make. And so they got rid of their studio and they work out of their apartment. And these are, you know, they meet these people who are art historically important, you know, and then they meet, you know, people that are quite the opposite, who need to go somewhere. And I learned, you know, within a year or two of leaving graduate school, that I was the kind of person that needed to go somewhere. If I stay in one place, I get nothing done. I work all the time, get nothing done except getting depressed. And I find that that's what I'm grappling with now. I would love more than anything to be able to go to the World Trade Center, to this 37th floor, where I'm supposed to be on this residency. But it becomes a matter of like risk assessment. But leaving the house is the hardest thing for me, which is both about people, I think, and also about like, regulating my body, right? Like I finally feel comfortable running outside now. Early in the morning, like I went this morning at 8, and there was very few people in the park. Coming out to what Garnet was saying, like about the science, right? It's like we've all become, I don't want to say amateur scientists, because amongst the three of us, the two of them are much more. I don't know Alan so well, but I know the two of you actually are legitimate scientists, and I'm maybe a scientist, but I know how to read the literature. But we've all really started to have to make these assessments, and in the United States, it's in part because our government has completely failed in making the assessments and giving guidance for us. So we've had to step in. And so having read it, it makes me feel more comfortable leaving the house, but not going inside. So I think for me, it's really about being stuck in this room.
Yeah. I was thinking, Garnet, too, when you were saying like we've all had to take on crash courses. And Addie, do you feel like people have taken on a real crash course in information security as well, and like using these different platforms? We've all
especially with the protests and everything, I've had friends suddenly reaching out who never, like, were always very resistant to it, and now suddenly with an administration that might not agree with their whatever, sexuality, religion, whatever it is, or color of their skin, suddenly they're starting to care, or they're wanting to protest, and they're aware that that might be an issue, and what do they need to do, and so those questions have definitely come out of the woodwork a little bit.
And is there, we've been banding around this really kind of hackneyed phrase about a new normal. What is it you want to see happen in the new normal going forward? Are there things you can point to?
I think for me, it's like people caring about people other than themselves. That's sort of something I would really like to see happen.
And Garnet, technologically, is there a new normal at your end? Something you're thinking that we've got a potential here to really change the way we use the technology or the way we think about it, or?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. Like I think the new normal is going to be quite different than. I'm not exactly sure. I think the new normal in a lot of ways is going to have lots of. Actually, I have no idea what the new normal is going to be, because it's like it's hard to say, but there's going to be a lot of people hugging each other. There's going to be a lot of people taking pleasure in being with each other in kind of a simple way. And there's a lot of discussions before this about travel and carbon footprint. I mean, I think there's going to be definitely things there, and my hope is that there's going to be a lot more attention paid to things like race and to other and to social issues. At the same time, it's completely disheartening in other ways, but I'm hoping that the new normal is good, I guess.
One of the things that we've always said, and this might be the good point to end it on, I suppose, is that artists are a bit like the bellwethers, or the canaries in the coal mine, that sometimes they can point us to changes in the way that we live and work that are changes that, for better or for worse, we need to know about, we need to be aware of. And certainly Jonathan Crary in his afterword that he wrote for the 24/7 show really put that out there. Artists are this isn't going to be a top-down. We're not going to solve this with the old top-down ways of doing things. We're going to solve this through kind of creative collaboration. So I don't know if anyone's got any last thoughts, but otherwise I'm going to thank you so much for joining us from your different setups and giving us a chance to see how you're working and what you're working on, what you're doing. Michael's waiting. It's been a really delight to work across the time zones with you, and I would encourage any other last thoughts. Okay, well, I'm going to encourage everybody to go away and watch your work, which is available online, much of it, and get to know the practices of these brilliant artists. And so to thank Hyphen Labs and Nastya Savaronko and Alan Warburton, who aren't here but are in the Sleep Mode program, and you can see their stuff at Somerset House. And then to thank very much Michael Mandiberg, Adi Wagner, and Garnet Hertz for joining us for this discussion. And to thank Somerset House and the University of Glasgow for supporting the Sleep Mode program, and to wish you all a new routine, a new, better routine than the one you had before. Thanks very much.
Are we off?
Not quite yet.